this is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
You know how it's never really about where you're going, it's about who you're going with? The right people can turn any drive into a great memory. That's something Toyota really believes. They design vehicles around real life and real people, the ones who make plans happen and bring everyone together. Inside, everything's built with passengers in mind. Comfortable seating, smart layouts, and space that actually works so everyone can relax and enjoy the ride. There's room for the people, room for the stuff, and room for the moments that happen along the way. Because when people are the destination, your ride is important. Learn more at Toyota.com and find the vehicle that fits your people. Wasabi is purpose-built to free your business from skyrocketing storage costs and fees. Wasabi is the go-to provider for professional and collegiate sports teams around the world. Check out Wasabi's AI-enabled intelligent media storage, Wasabi Air, to the industry's only cloud storage service with triple protection against cyber criminals. Wasabi, driving innovation in data storage for up to 80% less than market competition. Try for free at wasabi.com. Wasabi Hot Cloud Storage, proud partner of iHeart Podcast Network.
Scott Boulanger is a longtime Dynasty fantasy analyst who currently does work for On the Clock Fantasy. Some may know him as Jax Falcone. He hosts the Undrafted podcast, he's huge into Dynasty game theory, and some may consider him the VP of sarcasm. These are his late-round perspectives. It might feel like the fantasy football season just ended, but it's actually just getting started. DraftKings is your home for early best ball. No waiver wires, no roster management. It's the easiest way to get in on the action without the weekly grind. Go to DraftKings.com or download the DraftKings Daily Fantasy app and draft your early bird best ball lineup for a shot of a share of $1 million in prizes. Drafts stay open until the season kicks off, so now's the time to jump in. You draft it, we crown it. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY. Connecticut, call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. 18 plus in most states. Restrictions apply. See terms at DraftKings.com. Sponsored by DraftKings. What do I call you? Do I call you Scott? Do I call you Jax? What do you want people to call you?
You know, it's funny. My partner at the OTC, Joe Kuvatakis, Joe is awesome, and we went up to see the Warriors Celtics game, and my family went to visit his family, and we went to hang out. And he's like meeting my wife and the whole thing, and he's like, "Can I call him Jax? I don't know if I can call him Scott." So there you go. So that tells you everything you need to know about the name.
I mean, it's what we see. It's what we see on the timeline all the time. I've always just called you Scott.
Yeah,
but I don't. I just. What like if you're there are people listening right now, would you rather them call you Scott or call you Jax?
I don't care. I think the Jax thing is hilarious. It's fun.
Where did that stem from?
Well, because when I first got on Twitter, I wasn't trying to be noticed. I just wanted to be incognito. And so I just used an alias, but I wasn't trying to hide either. So I was just like, no, it's not about me. I'm just kind of figure out what's going on in the space. So it stuck. I tried to change it once. Someone was like, "Who the hell is Scott? Get this Jax guy back." I'm like, "All right, fine."
That's like when Rich Rebar, Lord Reeves on Twitter, he changed his handle to this has been like 2019 maybe. It was a while ago. But he changed his handle to Roto Reeves, and people lost their minds.
Yes.
They were going nuts because it was no longer Lord Reeves, even though Roto Reeves makes a lot more sense.
No, it's Lord Reeves, damn it. Yeah, exactly. That's just and the people are right about this. So I'm leaning in.
I've had some instances where I'm like, I need to change off of the late round QB handle because at this point nobody even really knows what that stems from and like where
the OGs do.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But whenever I go on shows and stuff, when it's someone that I don't necessarily know super, super well, they always approach me and they say, "Hey, let's talk quarterbacks because JJ's coming on." When I probably talk about that position the least.
I was going to say, right. Yeah, that's it. That's actually a reason enough to change it. If people think like you're like some sort of like quarterback guy.
Yeah, it gets me sometimes, but then I'm like, if I went down the Roto Reeves route, I know that like if I change it to like late round FF or something like that, which now I'm saying this on the show and now someone's gonna grab that.
Go steal it. Of course they will.
Yeah. I mean, whatever. I don't care at this point.
Yeah.
I'm never going to change it. It's similar. I see it as similar as like, Matthew Berry's always had the TMR stuff.
Yes.
Matt Harmon still has BYB in his handle. You just kind of deal with it. After that's what helped you, get into the space and get noticed a little bit.
Yeah,
people,
that's what it is.
People like that comfortability,
Yes.
Speaking of getting in the space, let's talk about that with you. I like to always intro with this for folks, especially if there's someone who hasn't listened to your work before in the past. What got you into fantasy football, and what's that journey been like for you?
Well, I mean, fantasy football, I hate to tell you how long I've been playing that dang sport. People start to understand how old I am, but I've been playing like since '99, playing fantasy football. Actually, Dynasty was the thing that really I equated, once I started to learn and play Dynasty, I equated it to the difference between arcade mode and franchise mode on Madden.
That's good, yeah.
It's like, do you just want to play one little game, or do you want to have a whole thing going?
Yeah.
And so the whole thing going, I mean, anybody who played franchise mode in Madden is probably a Dynasty player, is the way I look at it. So, that was when I did that, I would say, 15, 16, something like that. I mean, I'm not an early adopter of Dynasty, but as soon as I got into it, I was like, there's really not much content. Like, especially in the mainstream. I wasn't on Twitter at the time, and I was like, I would Google stuff. It'd be all paywall. I wasn't sure if it was any good. I didn't know anything,
Yeah.
So I was like, well, let me see on Twitter. And so I, had an alias, went on Twitter and started to figure out what's going on in the Dynasty space. And, as I started to communicate with people, I realized I had something to offer, and people wanted to hear what I had to say. And I was learning Dynasty game and geeking out on it. Really. I was like, this is so freaking cool, And so, I just started to eat it up. And then when I started to spit it out, people were listening to what I had to say.
Yeah, and you started doing the podcast,
yes.
And you were with the Undroppables,
yes.
And then now you're doing the OTC fantasy stuff. Tell everyone what that's all about.
Yeah, man, it's just just a fresh start in terms of starting to put together the thing that we think is most valuable in the Dynasty space, and I'm doing that with Travis Seal and Joe Kuvatakis. Travis was with me at the Undroppables, and had done the True North. He's built brands before. He knows what he's doing in that regard, and Joe and I are kind of doing the underground along with him. That's a podcast that we do together. But it really comes down to the Discord, and we've got some tools coming, although that's hard enough to build stuff. So we're it's taking some time, but we know kind of what we want to do, and the website will be out shortly, I promise. But we've got 3 pods, actually 2, one coming, and a lot of stuff like that. And so it's going to be really Dynasty focused and specific to that, prospect evaluation, things of that nature. So we really want to lean into the things that are the core of Dynasty.
Well, let's dig into all that stuff. Your handle, Dino Game Theory. So let me start this sort of Q&A with a higher level question here.
Yeah.
What's something in that game theory world that you think Dynasty managers consistently get wrong?
I was thinking about this question. It was a good question on the show sheet, and I was like, there's a lot of ways that you could go with this answer, and I thought I'm going to go kind of on a big scale. It's like optimism. I think there's just always too much optimism, and maybe a little bit too much, they're sure of themselves, but every, and I think you can take advantage of optimism in almost every league, especially during the draft. Every player in the draft is going to be good. Did you know that?
Oh yeah, I've heard that,
everyone,
yes.
all of these guys are going to be awesome.
Yeah.
But right?
No bus.
Am I right or wrong about that?
No, you're right.
Crazy
you're right.
to think about.
People do. This is a very, very good thing to bring up, though, because it's something that doesn't get talked about enough, is that there is this notion that whatever your pick may be, the 207, especially those late second round picks, when you sit back and you look at the actual hit rates of these guys, borderline atrocious.
Even when you hit, you miss. Like we sort of, right. I think you were in on like Marvin Mims, Jaden Reed in that area, right? We were both we were right. It didn't win us much,
No,
like sometimes
right,
even when you win the bet, you didn't, there's still too much optimism even when you win.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. Do you think that the optimism definitely carries over into, the example I'm thinking about is like a Matthew Golden type, right? Where Golden has this really crummy, by most measures, rookie season. And so going into year 2, of course, you look at the market. So like, I bring this up because it's really fresh top of mind for me, because I talked about him on the Sell Candidates podcast. I talked about him even on the show that I did earlier this week, and going over year 2 comps for these players. And a lot of the pushback is, well, his market value isn't that high, so we don't need to necessarily sell, which I get to a degree.
Yeah.
But you can make that argument for so many players that at some point you got to like, you know, like there is still some value there with a player like Golden.
Yeah.
Do you think that archetype and that situation is one where people very much so continue to have a ton of optimism for?
Yeah, I think, it's interesting as you say that. I think optimism turns to certainty. Like ultimately the reason we have optimism around these prospects is because, well, they were all good in college. We can all spin the story of how they're going to be good in the pros. We can sort of tell our own narrative about each player in our own mind. We can make it up. It didn't actually happen yet. So everything is in our mind. Once we've seen players, a lot of times then you'll see people saying Matthew Golden's for sure a bust, sell for sure. He's a bum. He'll never be anything. Other people saying it was a rookie. He's going to be right. So now it sort of shows itself in certainty rather than in optimism. Cause I think there's a lot of pessimism too, because as soon as we're hurt by a player in fantasy, I think of like Amari Cooper or like there's certain players that people like, I'll never roster that guy. And yet, they were like a wide receiver 2 for like 45 years in a row. It's like,
right.
It's not that bad, guys. So there's sort of that thing that, I think certainty boils over and then you take advantage of certainty. I've got a saying, I'm sure you've heard it, ready to be wrong. You got to be ready to be wrong. Think about how you might be wrong. Like even Matthew Golden, I faded Matthew Golden. I think, again, I win. I was right. Now I'm like, well, if people are that far out, maybe I lean back in. Is there a possibility he actually returns value?
Yeah, that's the way. Exactly. And I brought that up though, because I also like it when giving that advice and when talking through it, I think one of the hardest things to do is to anchor yourself to a market value that everyone just generally agrees with.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
And so I can sit here, like when I did that show on the sell candidates, I'm just basing it off of keep trade cut, and you can say what you want about KTC. People will.
It's great.
Right. Like people will hate, but like my response,
there's the haters again,
there's definitely, I mean, there's always gonna be haters.
Yeah.
But my response to that is I know that site is going to be used by a lot of dynasty managers. And so if that's the case, then they're going to anchor themselves to whatever that market value says on that site. Right. Yeah. And so like, I'm going to reference that because that's what a lot of people are going to be referencing.
Yep.
Now, when I talked about Golden, he was like wide receiver 39 or so. Yeah. Whenever I had brought him up as a potential sell, I like to use examples too on that show of like, hey, you might feel more optimistic, or you might feel like this guy's value just sunk and therefore you should go get him, as you're alluding to. But there are still some instances where these guys don't necessarily fall to a level of being completely irrelevant and you can only buy, where there's still some window here where you could sell. And so that was my example, if you will, like my point. I think you can throw like a Travis Hunter in there to a degree as well, but that's kind of a different circumstance and like very difficult to read and it's just different in general.
Yeah.
But with Matthew Golden, then now, I look at it now and, I talked about it earlier this week. I was like, these are the reasons that things are not looking good for Matthew Golden. We can obviously look at some outlier examples in the past where things have turned around, like one of his journey comps was Devontae Adams, where we saw that happen with Adams early on in his career. Yes. So it's just this balance. It's this and it's, to me, as a dynasty, analyst, obviously I do a lot of redraft in season, but dynasty, I'm doing a lot of dynasty out of season. And one of the most difficult things, in my opinion, is that there's just no market. Like there's no set market of what we're actually talking about here. No matter what I say, there's going to be someone that says I can't get them for that price, or that price is wrong, whatever the case may be. Do you find that to be a little bit difficult when talking about this
check your local listings thing? Check your local listings. Right. I mean, this is I just made a big long tweet today on something, and I put at the bottom, P.S. This is for these types of leagues. Check your local listings, because. Okay, you said a lot and I love it. I love the first of all, there's the player take, the possibility, the range of outcomes takes. And I think you are probably one of the best at that.
Thank you.
I feel like that's where, and you speak to a large audience. So then you get a lot of pushback from no matter what you say. And so I think you're also, thoughtful. And so then you start to think about, well, am I right? Am I wrong? Is that a good take, a bad take? Is that and I love that. I mean, really, it's your own sort of way of being accountable to what you're saying. And I appreciate that thoughtfulness, just so you know. I'm sure a lot of your audience agrees with what I just said there.
Thank you.
It's just true because, from a perspective of doing this, it's hard because you have to have a take,
Yeah. I mean, at least people want you to have a take all the time about everything.
And then they want to yell at you about how stupid it is, which is also fine. It's fine. But nonetheless, my point in saying this is that, that's the Matthew Golden take. And then, of course, the dynasty game theory in me goes, well, in a shallow league, he's a sell. In a deep league, he may be a buy.
There we go. Yeah.
So my dynasty game theory thought process starts to kick in because in a deep league, hey, he could be sort of a Jameson Williams light.
Yeah. Spiked week kind of guy.
Right? He could get there and that could be the positive. But if he does that and I'm in a managed league where I'm playing, 10 by 9, he's never cracking the lineup. So I might as well sell on his value now. That way, if the bottom falls out, I still got something for him. So there's the game theory, right? That's what I'm always thinking about. And that's what I'm always trying to have that conversation about the players. But it's not always, easy to do because there's not a lot of people thinking that way, quite frankly.
By the way, you bringing up the, me having to think about all these different angles and look at the details and stuff. I had someone actually, for my, wide receiver studs episode that I did earlier this week of looking at the prospects who produce like studs in college.
Yeah.
I was referencing in the past, hit rates of this group of players who had played 3 years in the league. That's how I framed it. But what I meant to say was guys who were eligible to play 3 years in the league, right? So they had been drafted before 2024, right?
Yeah.
Because they'd been able to play 2023, 2024, 2025. And I mentioned Henry Ruggs, who only played 2 years in the league. And someone was like, is that data bad? Because you mentioned, I'm like, no, guys, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. That's
I find it incredible. I do the anatomy thing. You're going to ask me about it later, but I had, it's like how many players out of this 15 player set were drafted in the first round, second round, third round, whatever the case, right? And I made one little mistake. I had one player in the fourth round instead of two, and two players in the third round instead of one or whatever. I mixed one digit. And someone was like, well, pretty good stuff, but, I was like, that's a good catch, bro.
I get caught literally. I mean, I have to be so careful. And I'm not, I say this all the time whenever I go on other shows and stuff. Yeah. And, shout out to this guy, but what taught me to be very, very detail oriented with this stuff is early on in the 2012 to 2014 time frame on Twitter, fantasy Twitter was a place where people would go back and forth for literal. I mean, I don't really see it happening as much anymore. Maybe it's just my exposure to what's going on.
No, but it's so true. There used to be these, it was amazing. It was the best theater of all time. I know exactly.
Oh, it was amazing. We would go back and forth. And I remember specifically Sigmund Bloom, who's a great friend now. Sigmund Bloom and I would go back and forth, and he has like a law background and stuff, and he's great at arguing, and I'm this 24-year-old kid trying to do something in this space. And we'd go back and forth, and I'm not even kidding. One of the things that goes through my head all the time when I'm publishing content is how would Sig poke holes in this argument? Yeah. How would taking me back to those moments of going back and forth. And that's how, that's just how, I know we've gotten off topic, but that's how you got to create content in the space oftentimes is that you have a lot of people who love this hobby just as much as you do, who are researching this stuff almost as much as you are. And so you better be crossing your T's and dotting your I's or else people are going to call you out.
Shameless plug. But, I think a lot of that, what you had there was what I'm seeking. And what a lot of people are seeking is sort of earnest conversation, right? Where even if you thought Sig was right or wrong, sometimes you actually take a position, you're like, I may be wrong here, but I'm going to sort of suss this out and see exactly what's going on, see where my thoughts are at. And then there's a respect level. Turns into sometimes name calling and the standard, Twitter tropes, and it's not even close, stuff like that. And you're like, come on, man. Maybe, but don't be a dick. So, a lot of that has turned to where a lot of the thoughtful people are, we find it in our Discord. It's growing, by the way. And if you like what I'm saying, go join because that's where it's really thoughtful, respectful, oh, maybe you're right, because who the hell knows,
Yeah, right. Well, that my favorite tweets, and I'm sure that I was guilty of it years and years ago, but I've really tried to not act this way and tweet this way. But it's the people that start with imagine thinking blah 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 after an outcome already happened when you're literally alienating half the people who thought that. Imagine thinking that this ADP was right or something like that. Guys, That means that a lot of people were drafting that player at that price.
Literally average draft.
That means you're just calling out like thousands of people just because you think that you're better than them from a
biggest part of the bell curve was stupid. Yes.
Yeah. Right. And I'm like, like that kind of stuff. Yep. I'm sure it existed back then, but I'll be naive and just say that back in the day, I'll be the old man here and say that back in the day that the back and forth was much different than it is.
I think there was more better and more worse. It was like a different type of conversation, right? You would stumble through a lot of the bad ones to find good ones, and when you found good ones, you were like, "Oh, this dude's actually pretty." And that honestly, that's kind of where I was like founded. I was a little bit of a. But not personally so. Like, once you read those sort of cringy sort of imagine that, it's like, I don't think I want to talk like that,
Right. You brought up the anatomy stuff that you do. Yeah. So each year you do these threads on the anatomy of the elite players at each position.
Yep.
Let's just focus on running back and wide receiver because that's going to take up a lot of the discussion today. Yep. It's the most important. Those are the most important positions in fantasy and in dynasty. So talk to me about just summarize the process for that. We'll start with running back. Okay. Yeah. So just what you're doing when you're doing these threads. I know this is a loaded question because there's a lot to it, but what you're doing when you're looking at the anatomy threads. And then if there's any running backs in this year's class or whomever that might get you excited based on some of those findings.
I know exactly where this comes from because I invented it, so to speak, or whatever. It comes from, if you go back far enough, I think this was like, in the 15 to 2020 in that window, like the late teens, there was a lot of like geeky dynasty talk, like the R squared of, this and that. It was a lot of that. Like, the data was not only like out there, but it was also coded in, if you're not smart, you won't want to listen to what I have to say type of thing. There was a lot of that. You remember that, right?
Of course.
Yeah. And so I was like, well, I kind of understand this. I mean, I'm not that guy, but I kind of get it. But I also don't think most people do, and I also don't like it. So I was like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take this thing and I'm going to do it really stupid and just make it so that like it's fun for me. So I did that, and it was like the idea is, and there's also another component of it. So number one was sort of not dumbing it down, but more making it more fun. So just taking the elite players, but not the ones that scored, because I see you do this, you do so well, but like taking the ones that scored as a running back 1 or 2 the year before. I might get Derrick Henry, who's older. I wanted to look at the top 12-ish dynasty ranked running backs or whoever, because that's really what we want, is we want to find those valuable pieces. What do they look like? And what it also does is rather than looking backwards, I think it also looks forward a little bit, or at least it tries to move the timeline forward. It catches things like the running back position getting smaller, right? Because it's just identifying the guys that are hip and happening now. James Cook, Devon Achane, Kyron Williams, etc. Kyron's not in it this year, but you get the point. There's a lot of smaller backs. So anyway, long story short, you take that data set of the top 12 or 15 at a position, and you just describe them. What did they look like as prospects? How big were they? How fast were they? What sort of key stats did they all share? And what does that data set look like? And then you can geek through it.
So when you look at the running back stuff, are there any, I know there's you had 15 different there's a lot of different variables in each one, but are there any that really stood out that was interesting? And then, traits. And then when you look at this class, are there any players that sort of match up with what you saw from some of these elite guys? Yeah,
that's a good question. So admittedly, many or some of the things that are on the anatomy don't matter, so much. Like they matter. Yeah. As a matter of fact, some of them I would do, and not only did they not matter, but they were noisy and they didn't even correlate at all. So I was like, well, I don't think that it's useless. So I'd take it out. I put other things in and, just having fun with it, the things that seem to matter more. When you look at, and I know you know this, when you look at running backs, I think pass catching matters. I look at a couple of things that sort of share or show what these elite prospects have. And, if you look at it, so Bijan, Jameer, Achane, Genty, Hampton, JT, Trevion Henderson, James Cook, Judkins, Irving, CMC, Breece Hall, you start to get to the backside, you get Scadaboo and Ken Walker, and I put Saquon in there for honorable mention. So you start to wonder, where should I cut it off each year too? Should I include these guys? But when you look at all these guys and then you take the data set they do some things very, very well. First of all, I think one thing that is still important is speed score. These guys are generally pretty fast. I think almost all of them, except for a couple, have a speed score over 105, which is kind of cooking.
It's good. Yeah, that's good.
Right.
Yeah.
So, you start to look at that, and then, we haven't gotten to the combine, but now that we're getting to the combine, that's what I'm going to be looking at. So combine, I'll be looking at speed score, and then just how can you, and I would volley this back at you. I look at pass catching at the running back position. I look at it a lot of different ways, just sort of raw numbers like total receptions in a year, and then sort of more geeky ones like literally your target rate, targets per route run, or ADOT. Now I'm looking at these things to try and see if there's correlation to that. What have you found at the pass catching? Because I think that's pretty important, don't you?
Yeah, of course. The running back model, I added a little bit more rushing production this year to it, but that was only within the context of adjusted total yards per team play. So it's still factoring in receiving in that metric, right? Because it's total yards. But there's a little bit of rushing. There is a little bit of rushing. But last year with the ZAP model, with the running back model, I only had all receiving because draft capital generally is capturing a lot of the rushing production. And what's really differentiating is the receiving aspect. And not only does it matter more in fantasy, and a lot of times I think too with prospecting, and look, I have Matt Waldman on every year and such, and he does unbelievably great work. But it's one of those things where a lot of the, draft analysts out there are also looking at what real teams might be looking for in these players. And they're scouting in more of the traditional sense of what I'm trying to solve here is which players are good on a football field and which players are bad on a football field. Whereas like what the ZAP model is trying to solve is purely who's going to score more fantasy points.
Yeah.
And those archetypes are going to overlap, of course. Jamar Chase is going to be good in both, real scouting evaluation, from a film perspective, and any modeling that you might do for fantasy. But there's going to be some players, especially at running back, where at running back, people can very much so when they're watching film, fall in love with a guy based on what he does on the ground and how good he is as a rusher. And sometimes that'll translate, but many times it doesn't. Many times we're going to need a more robust receiving profile. So I look at adjusted receiving yards per team pass attempts. That's just adjusted for, age and strength of program. And then the other one that I swear by, and I know that others who model don't swear by it nearly as much, but I found it just based on the way that I work with the ZAP model and what the ZAP model is solving, and it in the way that it looks at draft capital, just plain old reception share, right? The percentage of catches that a guy has in his offense. Now, when you get into the later rounds, it starts to matter a little bit less, and some of these other things are triggered to matter a little bit more. But if you were to just look at some of the biggest draft busts since 2011 at running back, and you just look at reception share, most of them have lower reception shares overall. Now, you should do things like, if you look at Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins, obviously they shared a backfield at Ohio State and for that final year. So obviously you got to do some teammate scoring, there's all of that kind of stuff. You need context, but someone's going to say, well, what about Derrick Henry? And it's like, okay, but he's the outlier of all outliers. He did not have a great reception share, but most guys who are in that position, who go day 2, who go day 1, that end up busting do have those lower reception shares. So that's another one. But yeah, I think that once people start to dig in, like what you're alluding to here, is that once people start to dig into these metrics a little bit more, they soon realize and quickly realize that receiving is like Davis Maddox just built a new model. And I was looking at what he did with that model. At running back, he only has receiving metrics, and he shouted me out on the video that he had done and stuff because he knew that I was doing that with my model last year. But I think that he's just an example of you're starting to really dig in, you're starting to model this stuff, and you're like, wait, these rushing metrics, you can find ways for them to matter, but the receiving stuff is just unbelievably important at running back.
Yeah, we'll probably get to a prospect that falls short of that. The other thing I was looking at was I just sort of play around with different things that seem to they might matter. And it's even 15-yard run rate for their careers. Mm-hmm. If I look at the data set I just gave you, all those players, first of all, as you go down the list, the number goes down. It's crazy. Some of the worst ones are toward the bottom, of that list I just mentioned. So, crazy that would be the case that, literally, but 15-yard run rate for their careers, that data set that I just gave you of the elite guys, only 2 or below 8. Basically, they're all 8 or 9 or better percent, basically 10%. I think they're almost at 10% average. If I look at the data set, I'm just looking at the prospects that I've charted so far, is probably 10 or 15 of those. Only 2 are above 10, and really only, I think that might be it, 1 more over 8. So like they're all 4, 5, 6, 7%, 15-yard run rate. It's like, isn't that something? I mean, it's like, no kidding. Now you're right. Draft capital will push it's like, of course they're not that good, but I think a lot of times we start looking at, look, I just mentioned there's like 5 or 6 RB2s. Everybody's got a different guy. It probably is. They're probably not an RB2. They're probably something else. They're probably last year's RB7.
Yeah, truth. Yeah. And we'll get to this class in a second because it's a very, very interesting class.
Yep.
I mean, since we're talking about it, like, is it Jeremiah Love and the rest essentially? Like,
yeah. For me,
no one close.
Yeah, I think, I don't mean to spoil the show sheet, but you were going to ask me, you were going to ask me after that. I mean, cause I got to go there because we're right there. Is there an RB2? And I would say that there is not an RB2. Do I have a favorite RB2? No, because there isn't one. There just isn't a guy who's Travion Henderson, Quinshad Judkins, or anything close to that from last year. No, not at all. We had Genty. Yeah. Okay, Genty, Love, we can talk. That's fun conversation. We'll have it right now. But like, is there a RB2? No. Is there one for me? Not really. And therefore, I would say this. I don't think that I'll be drafting whoever it is, the RB2 in rookie drafts. Because of how you envision the natural inflation of that happening in rookie drafts.
Yes.
Yeah. Whoever that is. I don't care who it is. I don't want that guy.
Yeah. That's where I think, I mean, look, this is difficult to really nail down. And I think that I've shifted my stance on it a little bit over the last year, but it's this idea that when there's a stronger running back class, that better running back, that teams are going to not draft running backs high because they know they can wait. Yeah. And if there's a bad running back class like this one, I'd say I don't think this is as bad as the 2024 class, but it's definitely got some warts. There's definitely some issues with it. Now, does that mean though that someone like a Jonah Coleman will be drafted higher because of the scarcity issue? Whereas last year, what if Bayshaw Tootin and Cam Scatterbo would have been day 2 picks in this class? Like who knows how that will go down?
Yeah.
I would say that like my research that I did on this last year said that it doesn't matter because teams will just get the guys that are kind of highest on their board. And that's what we've kind of seen historically.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I do think there's a little bit to it whenever you get to sort of like the latter parts of, middle and latter parts of that position in general. But regardless, I don't think that I think this is where like modeling can be really, really helpful because it'll give you a score that's just the context of that guy and where he got drafted and what his measurables are and metrics are based on history, as opposed to saying like this guy is here versus the rest of the class. Now here's the thing though, is that wide receiver, some say it's really bad. Some say it's okay. Some say it's good. Why don't you talk about the wide receiver anatomy thread and such and research that you've done, and if there's any wide receivers that you think kind of fit that mold this year?
Yeah, for sure. So the wide receiver model, well, I almost said model. The anatomy is different than the model. The model's a lot smarter, as you know, than me.
Yeah.
And a lot smarter than my anatomy series. We think we built a really good model that we're going to be using as well. The model's different though. And I know you know it because I've given you a peek behind the curtain of that model. It's, regressive draft capital, the whole thing. It's very, very different. And so it's going to give us a different perspective, which I think it's valuable, and so we like our model. In terms of the anatomy, I think that there's so many things, but a lot of them are just basically per route run. So like, first downs per route run, yards per route run, targets per route run, basically your target rate, we look at first downs per route run is what gave us, players like Puka Nacua, who was shrouded in a lot of, other metrics like yards. And you know what I mean? Catches because he didn't play as much and was hurt and this, that.
Lad McConkey, same deal with Lad McConkey.
Lad is another one. That's exactly right. And so it helped us be in on those players, sort of coming out. So that's where I sort of focus. And I do think that this class is good, not elite, but it's good.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Okay. So let's go back to running back. Okay.
Sure.
Jeremiah Love.
Yep.
Looked at as the clear. I mean, I want to ask you a few things here. Number one, do you think he's as good of a prospect as Ashton Genty last year? And then I'll even take it one step further and say like a Bijan Jahmyr Gibbs before him. And then do you think as the second part of this, do you think that he's the clear cut 101 in super flex rookie drafts where obviously you can get the Mendoza in there if need be?
The Mendoza. The machine. The
Mendoza.
Yeah, the Mendoza. I think, as John Lobb called him on my podcast, he didn't really call him this, but he equated to I think it was Ulysses S. Grant, the butcher. So we're calling him the butcher now. Anyway, it's a long story. Look, I think Jeremiah Love is every bit the prospect that Genty was. He actually falls a little bit short if you look at a lot of the college metrics, but he also, I think, played a higher level of competition. So if you want to adjust for that, it's close enough. I think he's very much right there. So yes, to answer that question. In terms of Bijan, I don't think so. I think Bijan was a special creature. So I think he was a little bit of a higher price. But look, you're splitting hairs at this point because really, you give me Jeremiah Love in the Chiefs offense or something, making up in a good
Commanders
offense,
even.
In a good offense versus Bijan in a bad offense. I'll take Jeremiah Love because running back is a little bit of an interdependent position, of course.
I actually think that's going to be a huge point of conversation in a year or two. Is Jeremiah Love, because like the top 10 has teams in there that have like franchise quarterbacks and could realistically just go after the running back. And, I think the NFL is not the same as it was 5 years ago in terms of the importance of the running back position. And so teams might feel a little bit more okay with spending up. Whereas I think last year, the Raiders getting Ashton Genty was quite literally Pete Carroll just living in the past and not I don't think Pete Carroll was being forward thinking when he was drafting Ashton Genty, even though some teams might have been forward thinking and wanting a player like Ashton Genty. When you look at the top 10 right now, there's teams in there that are kind of, I think the Commanders are intriguing. I think the Chiefs are intriguing. Do they go that direction? Who knows? Whenever I look at Love, I think that one place, so like Genty does look better in the Zap model than Love did. The one thing I'll say with Love though is that, we're recording this on Thursday. The combine for running backs is going to be happening over the weekend. And if Jeremiah Love weighs in at a, hefty weight and then he runs unbelievably fast, then all of a sudden we're probably elevating him. Cause I do, look, Ezekiel Elliott was faster than I think people remember.
Of course. He wasn't always fat Zeke. He was awesome.
Yeah, right. I think that we're looking at kind of like that archetype of play and type of player and impact as like a Zeke had, with Love. But yeah, I think he's, to your point, it's like, when you get to this level of prospect, you can look at landing spot, and that landing spot could very easily just be the differentiator from Ashton Genty being a stud, because Ashton Genty in the Chiefs offense or wherever could probably dominate. Or, if Jeremiah Love goes these spots, he's the one who dominates. And then we're just ranking him ahead of Genty in Dynasty all of a sudden, which I don't think is like that absurd if the spot is that good, because destination and situation matters more at running back than it will at wide receiver.
Yeah. And I think when you look at we'll talk about the 101 real quick, but I think when you look at Jeremiah Love as a prospect, like everything I look at, like, if you look at the anatomy, it's like his receptions are great. His yards per carry, which it's kind of a base stat, if you will, but I actually do think it shows some signal. I mean, good players gain more yards on fewer attempts. It's just kind of true. I mean, if you try and rank them through that, that's stupid. But if you just see signal of big plays, I like that,
Sure.
And look, he's 6'7" for his career. That'll be the best. That'll be tied with JT amongst that group. So that's really good for a career. His yards per reception are fine. That's great. I mean, I look for early college production. I think that's something that, is going to eliminate some wide receivers, in the class as well. But, if a guy can't come on, can't do something in his freshman or sophomore year of college, and you're going to tell me he's elite, hard to believe. He had 1362 total yards before his junior season. Yards per route run 1.60 for his career. That puts him, right up there with all the other best players except for like CMC and Gibbs. He had a 20% 10-yard run rate one season, 17% 10-yard run rate. We talked about the run rate being north of 8. He was 10.2. 15-yard run rate for his career was Jeremiah Love. He also is over 30 basically missed tackles forced per rush for his whole career. That's a really strong number. We do see that translating the missed tackles forced from college to the NFL. So it's not like he's missing anything on the anatomy. So he definitely clearly defines he's going to be drafted high. And then as you point out, if he runs fast with a good body type, it's like an absolute home run. In terms of the 101, I think so. Although, like you say, Mendoza, and maybe there's a wide receiver that lands so beautifully, like you just can't imagine, one of the top three, you're like, oh my God, this is like heaven. He's great. And this is a great situation, maybe. But I think as of right now, I mean, I would not hesitate to draft Jeremiah Love at the 101. And Mendoza's growing on me, man. What an awesome kid, huh?
Yeah, no, I agree. And I understand the argument going quarterback, especially in these super flex formats, especially some super flex formats where they matter so much. The issue I have is when you look at strictly just draft capital and what happens with, especially in recent memory. Yeah. And what happens with these running backs, not only are they so unbelievably productive, right? Which, by the way, like I think that like I shouldn't say the Zap model really liked Genty, really liked, Jahmyr Gibbs, these pass catching back, like, because Genty had that second to last season that his pass catching was unbelievable. Yep, that's right. And so that's why he looks better than like a Love, in the model, because Love's receiving was above average, but it wasn't like so otherworldly that, he was just this obvious, 80 catch guy at the NFL level. Regardless, he's a great prospect, so I don't want to, dwell on that. But the fact that we're going to see great production because of his draft capital itself and just the work that he's going to get, we have strong confidence that he's a really good prospect. There's still going to be insane volatility with even the wide receivers. Like even if we get a Carnell Tate or a Jordan Tyson or whomever in the exact spot we want them to be, we can draft them high, sure, but there's still going to be that instability that you just don't get with those high-end running backs, which is why I'm just, it's just kind of like, you got to go Jeremiah Love, I think, even so over Mendoza, because you get busts at quarterback all the time. And we know that it's a really difficult position to evaluate. And I love Mendoza too, but we just have to be realistic about that bust rate of these positions. Yes. And let's just say, like, hypothetically, let's say that Mendoza's ceiling and his importance at his position in fantasy is greater than Jeremiah Love's. And I only say that because we see the dynasty market right now, and we see quarterbacks ranked really, really high. Number one, does he have the mobility to be more than a Joe Burrow-esque kind of player? That's one question to ask with Mendoza. Right. But regardless, the range of outcomes for Mendoza is still much, much wider seemingly than what we'll see from Jeremiah Love.
Yeah, absolutely. You can fast forward to, mid-season and Jeremiah Love's just being awesome like all these other running backs, right? And then Mendoza is doing something of a Jared Goff, Cam Ward first year. And you're like, oh, what the what did I do? Like,
and it's not going to surprise you, right? No. And it's not because that's what happens at quarterback. It's not this like shocking revelation that sometimes these guys just aren't nearly as good as what we think. And so that's where the range of outcome stuff comes into play. And
put simply, Jeremiah Love's the best bet on the board. Period. Yeah. Easy.
Yeah. Period. But when you factor everything in, Jeremiah Love is it.
You know how it's never really about where you're going. It's about who you're going with. Like, the destination could be totally average, but if the right people are there, it becomes a great memory. Toyota really gets that. Toyota designs vehicles around real life and real people, the ones who bring everyone together and somehow make the drive part of the fun. There's room for all the stuff that comes with togetherness: luggage, golf clubs, camping gear, plus comfortable seating, smart layouts, and space that lets everyone relax. And Toyota's lineup makes it easy to find your match. The RAV4 is perfect for everyday adventures. The Grand Highlander brings serious space for up to 8 with generous legroom and expansive cargo space. The Highlander also has space for up to 8. It's ready for big moments and spontaneous ones, balancing style and flexibility. And the Sienna is built for everyday life: carpools, road trips, snacks, spills. And it even has a built-in vacuum for when things get a little too messy. Because when people are the destination, your ride is important. Learn more at Toyota.com and find the vehicle that fits your people.
Hey, it's Carissa Thompson. Everything these days is fighting for your attention. Work, family, social media, and it makes it tough to figure out what should really come first. But here's something that absolutely deserves to be at the top of your list: your breast health. Breast cancer is the second most common cancer and the second leading cause of cancer death among women in the United States. And the rates are still rising. More women under 50 are being diagnosed too. But here's a stat that really hits home. 1 in 2 women who qualify for annual breast screenings aren't getting them. That's half. And yet, when breast cancer is caught early, the survival rate is over 99%, nearly 100% for stage 1 before it spreads. If you're 40 or older, you should be getting screened every year. And if you're under 40, it is never too early to understand your risk. So come on now, pay the girls some attention. Head to yourattentionplease.com to learn your breast cancer risk and what screenings you might need. Trust me, your future self will thank you. Brought to you by Novartis.
Well, he had a backup in college, Jadarian Price.
He sure did.
When you look at Price, the lack of production, which is, we can excuse away. I get it, right? But does that scare you at all when you're projecting how well this guy's gonna be at the next level? I saw you tweeting a little bit about Price, maybe like 2 or 3 weeks ago. Do you think that is he your RB2, and are you worried about that lack of production?
Look, I think, is he my RB2? I don't even have an RB2. I don't really. I really don't. I mean, I could probably look and tell you who I have there. It's so immaterial to me because I think none of those guys, like, I just have them in a cluster. You know, when I do rankings too, like if you were to see my sort of dynasty, especially the rookie rankings right now, you'd see those 4 or 5 next guys: the Emmett Johnson, Jadarian Price, Jonah Coleman, Katron Allen, Nick Singleton. I think all 5 of them are just in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in a row after some stuff. You know, it's like they're there. I don't know which one's going to be. So that's kind of how I see them. I don't really have a ranking of them, but I know for a fact that JJ Zachariason is concerned because everything in your model basically tells you to run away screaming from Jadarian Price. Yet, of course, common sense comes in and go, wait, I know he's good. How good is he? The question I asked on Twitter was, because the outlier in my anatomy, data set in that model, so to speak, the outlier is Ken Walker. He's the one that is in the top 15 here, dynasty running back, that doesn't have a pass catching upside or a pass catching profile as good as all of those other players in that 15 player data set. And I would argue that if he hadn't won the Super Bowl MVP, he might not be in that list because his value might have fallen outside of, because I use top 15 consensus.
Or if Zach Charbonnet didn't get hurt.
Right. So without a couple of things kind of going right, he might be outside of that. Point being is he's sort of a borderline elite dynasty running back asset, to be fair. And so, which is why I have a hard time knowing when to cut it off, but that's different topic. It brings up the conversation. It's great. And I asked the question, is Jadarian Price a better prospect than was Ken Walker?
I mean, I would say definitely not.
Agree. I agree. So, there you go. I guess if you need him to be Ken Walker to be sort of,
that's a good point.
To get there. If he's not that, then what exactly are you? He's not an RB. You're RB2 in a class. There,
Yeah, I mean, like my stance. So you mentioned like the ZAP model and the way that it's going to look at Jadarian Price. I have a teammate score, and that teammate score will look at, like I said, reception share is something that gets weighted as like it interacts with draft capital within the model. Yeah. And when a player has an alarming reception share, that's just one of the triggers that the model is like, oh, this guy, there might be a red flag here or whatever. But if there's a teammate and a teammate score based on draft capital, so Jeremiah Love goes top 10, wherever he goes, I mean, there's going to be a decent teammate score for Jadarian Price because of that. And then Jeremiah Love's going to get some teammate score if Jadarian Price goes top, 2 rounds or something. If he does go day 2 pretty comfortably, then Jeremiah Love will get a nice little boost from a teammate score perspective as well. But, what the model has learned from history is that the players who do have, and a lot of times it's not that they had an identical situation to this, because I really think, looking back, the only situation that kind of runs parallel to this is the Roshan Bijan situation, that we had a few years ago. But Roshan Johnson was not looked at the same way as Jadarian Price.
I was going to say Sony Michel, Nick Chubb.
Yeah. So you could look last year, of course, at the Ohio State running backs, right? but I mean more so just like such an elite player in Jeremiah Love, such an elite player in Bijan Robinson that the RB2 just had no shot at seeing any sort of work at all.
It's a Bijan
right?
Roshan, sure.
And so most of the time,
that's a cautionary tale, actually.
Yeah, it is. It is. But most of the time, the players who have a beefy enough teammate score are doing so based on sort of this consolidation of a larger backfield of guys who came out the year prior, or guys who are coming out that same year who might not be so elite like a Bijan or a Jeremiah Love, but might be a day 2 player. So a lot of them are like the Alabama backs from like, the 2010s when they like every year there were like 2 or 3, Alabama backs that people were at least semi-concerned with. And so if you look at history though, and you look at those players' profiles, if you give them a proper boost in reception share, you can kind of get to the right spot for where like a Jadarian Price probably should be rated and ranked. And so based on projected draft capital right now, in the ZAP model, he's actually clustered with Jonah Coleman and Emmett Johnson right now. Even though he has a historically horrific reception share, right? But to your point about like Kenneth Walker,
a misprint.
It does. It looks like it's got to be fake and wrong. Yeah. But to your point about the anatomy stuff, like if Kenneth Walker is the lower end, and I mean, I could talk for days about Kenneth Walker's receiving profile and people, coming at me for saying that he was a bad receiver. I never said he was a bad receiver. I question the amount of work he would get as a receiver coming out of college. And I think we've seen that come to fruition. Of course, he had one year above an 8% target share, you guys. Like what, this is what we kind of expected to happen. Kenneth Walker's a great player and a great runner. And I liked him this past year, in fantasy, which was wrong. But if Kenneth Walker, to your point, is on the lower end of those elite players, and we know that, like, to me, Kenneth Walker is like the realized version of Jadarian Price. He is if Jadarian Price just got the production and workload that we would expect. But we can't just make that assumption about Price. That's where I stand, is that like, yes, that's an outcome for sure for Jadarian Price. Cause I think that he's explosive. I had great early down guy, but
I had John Lobb on the show, and I was sort of talking like you were, and he said no. He made the argument that basically Jadarian Price was the beneficiary of second string tired defenses and blowout wins. Where
was he even lower than with Price?
Yes.
Interesting.
Yes. And I thought, wow, that's interesting, because I was expecting and hoping to hear some like college football. He's freaking awesome, and because he's a college, and so I was like, oh, that's an interesting, because I hadn't really heard that take, because it seems like it's like the college guys are all like, he's awesome, book it. And and I believe that because he was good.
There are some insane explosives from Jadarian Price in college.
Looks dope to me. I agree, right? So then, then you look at the data, and so it's kind of interesting. Like, is it data versus film? And he sort of says, hey, hold your horses. Like, this is a guy who is running in the wake of Jeremiah Love, right? And truth be told, while he does have some pretty good rushing, metrics, they're not as good as Jeremiah Love, which we wouldn't expect them to be, but he had to step down from that. So, it's not even close,
right? Like that's the thing, is that like, when we look at Travion, because I've gotten the Travion Quinshon Judkins, I mean, I talked about it on the podcast. I've gotten multiple questions about that in relation to this. The difference, guys, is that Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson both had shared production in that backfield.
Yes.
The Notre Dame backfield was very much just largely Jeremiah Love.
Yes.
And I understand why, because he's a monster. I get all that, but it just goes to show that like, there's so much projecting that needs to go on with Jadarian Price that, we'll see where his ADP lands and all that. And we'll see I don't want to just say like, I'm not going to draft the dude, but if he has a traditional RB2 price tag in a rookie draft, that's going to be a really tough sell for me. Because I want, I would much rather just know that could it happen? Sure. Yes. That's in the range of outcomes. Like we said, it could be he could be a Kenneth Walker type, you know, like that's definitely there.
Look, I'll give you this example. Let's look at last year. A player that I loved, like at this time, was RJ Harvey. I freaking I was so RJ Harvey, like everything.
Yeah. Right? Harvey pilled.
I loved it. I you put on the film. I loved everything about Harvey, and I was singing about Harvey. And then he goes in the second round. And then he gets steamed up to the first round in rookie drafts. I hardly had any RJ Harvey. because I don't think that's correct. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, that's not correct. That's not his value. That's not what I saw. I loved him. And I thought that the market was too high on him, you know? So
you loved him when he was a day 3 pick or like a late third or something.
Yeah. Like, let's go. Are you kidding me? Like, this guy's got some pop, you know?
Yeah.
And then when he's a first round pick. So look, there will be a second running back selected in the first round of our Superflex rookie drafts.
Yeah.
Right. There will be another one.
And whoever that is probably a fade. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm out on that guy.
I think, I early take, I'd probably agree, but as you know, I can't say that as concretely because, you know, someone out there is going to hold me to that.
Hold me. Whoever that guy is, I don't even know who he is, and I'm fading him. I think it's trust me, I think that's the right take. I definitely think that's the right take. Are there any running backs that are projected to go kind of later in the draft that you're interested in right now? It's hard to find.
It is.
You know, I don't know. I think when I think of this, I normally think of because I have had some pretty good hits back there, over the years. And, you know, I can't take all the credit. Some of them were sort of walked to me by some smart people, but, you know, Ramondre Stevenson, Elijah Mitchell, Kamani Vidal, there's been, Julius Chestnut made the league. Like, I mean, that could, it
was a thing.
That was, he made the league. I always say that's a win. You know, people would ask, like, you know, it's a win. He's still on a roster for crying out loud. So anyway, looking deep, I don't see it. The guy that I think is kind of going to be an interesting value proposition potentially is Nick Singleton.
I was hoping I feel like I was just saying that over and over in my head, and it just like got to you. I'm with you with Singleton. What do you see with Singleton?
Well, I'm kind of hoping that he is, faded into the sort of because look, of those 5, someone's going to be the RB6 in this class.
Yeah,
I'm hoping that's him. I'm hoping everybody just sort of forgets about him, and I can get him at that cost because then he's a late round, But look, if Nick Singleton becomes the RB2, I'm out.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think,
but
I think it's going to be pretty impossible for that just because of the foot injury, and him,
you know what I mean?
I do.
Yeah,
of course. It's the RJ Harvey situation.
Yeah. So I think it's Nick Singleton. His profile is vexing, because he's up and down literally year to year to year to year. All 4 years have this sort of ping pong effect. There are some things that are a little bit sticky, year to year that I don't love. He gets criticized for some of his rushing acumen, decision making between the tackles, things like that. And sometimes I throw that away because sometimes it can be a little noisy and people are misreading situations. But I think it's probably pretty true with this guy. I don't think he's a very refined down to down runner. So I think I want to see him drafted in a situation where he's sort of the 1B, home run threat, pass catching, player on a team. If he's that guy, I think he poses some value. I think if he, if someone somehow brings him in as their sort of starter and thinks he's a bell cow, that's a mistake.
Yeah, no, I really like Singleton. He was one of the Zap model. I would imagine once the draft is over, because I think he's going to fall in the draft a little bit because of the injury, and so we're not going to see him run or anything. And the thing is that he's explosive and he's not small. So. He's not small either. And when you get that combination, chances are you could have gotten like a really nice speed score from Singleton if he were healthy. And if that were to happen, then all of a sudden we're talking, day 2 pick potential. But, maybe that still happens. But I think there's a chance he's like more more of a 4th round player. And that's going to obviously turn people off if, people are going to be weighted by draft capital. But he's got a great receiving profile. There's size to him. And when you get that combination, that's great. But then there's the explosiveness to him, which I think he would have run a decent 40. My only fear is that some of the comps that came up when I was looking into him was like a CJ Procise type, like I think that we've fallen. One was like Jay Ajayi, but then, so you get like an interesting player like that who at least gave us like, and who knows what would have happened with his career if things would have gone certain ways. But like, then you get like the Procise and the Robert Turbin type players, where they had decent production profiles and stuff, and they were athletes. It just never truly translated in the NFL. So I think there's a range of outcomes there, but there's a range of outcomes for any day 3 guy or late day 2 guy.
Yeah, I think if you look at like his missed tackles forced per rush, certainly you're not going to like it. Both his best season is not even that good, and his career numbers, I'm looking right now. It looks like it's the lowest of anybody I've charted here is missed tackles forced per rush for his career. So not good, right? And certainly is not synonymous with the anatomy guys. That's for darn sure. So, that's why I say, like, when you put these guys into that type of thing, like, they're just not those guys. And so if somehow or another, like, at first we might have thought Nick Singleton was that, because in his first couple of years, like, especially his freshman year, he went off. And so you start to think, okay, well, what can this guy become? And then he falls back, and he just
it was very flatline. And to be fair, he shared a backfield with another pro, right? With Allen. But like, I'm with you though with Singleton. I think that he's a very, very interesting prospect to watch. Let's move on to wide receiver though. Okay. Because this is a really interesting wide receiver class, in my opinion. I've done about half of the running back profiles because I want to wait for the combine to happen so I can have a little bit better or not. But I don't care about the combine as much at wide receiver. So I'm almost done writing all 47 profiles for the wide receivers. So I am very ready to chat about these wideouts. So we have this big three this year. Do you think that it's a big three, or do you think that there's only two guys, or is Casey Concepcion someone that you're interested in? Where are you at with the top end of this draft at wide receiver?
I think I agree with the big three thing. There's some red flags on all three of the big three, but they're not red. They're like light pink, there's some sort of, I think the biggest red flag is the guy that everybody loves the most is Carnell Tate, the NFL guy, we talked about this a number of times. There's always that, it's the Marvin Harrison Jr. now. I mean, there's always a guy that I think is a little bit overvalued. Look, Rome Odunze, these ex receivers don't necessarily perform the way we want them to in fantasy. I don't know. Who's the last one? I mean, Brian Thomas Jr. went out and had a great year, then a terrible second year.
Point.
Tell me the guy. Just tell me the guy. It's not Jamar Chase. Like, Jamar is actually that guy, I guess. But but
Jamar. But no, I get what you're saying, because Jamar Chase is more of the
he's a lot of slot. Like,
and there's more of that like Neighbors archetype with him, where they're more of those like force missed tackles guys.
Yes.
Like, I would argue that you could, if you want to extend that and not just say they're elite, but like, that's in the DJ Moore, Luther Burden kind of area in terms of like style and just what they're able to do with the ball in their hands. Yeah. That's different than what the traditional
outside player. Yeah. And so, I mean, that's why I brought him up to sort of differentiate so people kind of know what we're talking about and so Carnell, he does have a great teammate score, but who else had that same teammate score was JSN, Marvin Harrison Jr., and Emeka Egbuka. And they don't have the same sort of targeting issues that Carnell Tate had. I mean, his yards per team pass attempt is very low compared to the elite guys. His career first downs per route run, he ran a lot of empty routes. Now, granted, he ran it next to some of the greatest receivers. I mean, his career target
Jeremiah
rate,
Smith,
is 19%. Like, that's the lowest out of any of these guys. I mean, it's the lowest guy I've charted in the class. Like, I'm down to like 15 or 20 guys that I've done this for. And, that's not great. So there's some slight flags with Carnell Tate, and I love him. It's the hard part. It's not like I'm saying he's not good. I'm just saying analytically, we have to say it,
Yeah, I would agree. Like, I think he's a really good prospect, as you're saying. But if you look at, like, if you want to compare him to the Ohio State guys that have come out before him, he has, over the last 5 years, he has the worst breakout score in my model, my methodology of doing breakout score, which is based on receiving yards per team pass attempt.
Yeah.
And like, does the model does not account for Jeremiah Smith because it does not know that he exists / is going to be as good as he is.
Right.
And if you start to factor that in, you get way more subjective, and I'm very open to saying the teammate score is not perfect. It's very hard for it to be perfect.
Yeah, it's hard.
But it does get signal. It is able to get signal. And so he is getting some of that based on, who he's played with, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, I think it's a really interesting.
I would just say, like, Emeka Egbuka, Marvin Harrison Jr., Jeremiah Smith himself, and who else did I say? JSN. All these guys, Garrett Wilson, they all played with each other.
Right.
Okay, grade him just amongst Ohio State receivers, and he sucks at that. You know what I mean? So,
Which is, grading him off of the best of, in the league.
Yes.
Right. So, but yes, to your point though, like, let's look at ceiling and what that true ceiling looks like. I think that what you brought up about where his alignment might be and where what he brings to the table in real life versus fantasy could be a little bit different.
Yeah. Let me just say this plainly.
Yeah.
He will have to be a better target earner in the NFL than he was in college to return value for you on your fantasy team. Period.
Yeah, I think that's valid. And I think because I think that from a real football perspective, he will be very effective for a team.
He's awesome.
He can stretch the field. He can make these big plays. Like, I get all of that, right? But how big of a volume getter will he be? Whereas I look at someone like Mekhi Lemon and I don't have those concerns if he's in the right spot, right? Yeah. Similar to what we've seen with like an Amon-Ra St. Brown or whomever. Obviously JSN. He gets comped to, or a JSN. Yeah. Where are you at with Lemon? Are you afraid of any of the slot stuff? Does that scare you a little bit? Or do you think he's just a great prospect?
He's a great prospect, especially if we're playing fantasy football. Like, if you and I are running an NFL football team and we're like, dude, we can get Carnell Tate. Oh yeah, let's do that. Cause like he puts pressure on, like I understand, I understand the real football implications of having a player like Carnell Tate. By the way, Carnell Tate almost had a perfect quarterback rating when targeted this year. Did you see that? It was like 153 or something, 151.
I did not know.
It's out of control. So anyway, his efficiency is which is
predictive for the record. That's actually a pretty decent metric at wide receiver. Yeah.
It is. And so, he's great. He's just going to have to earn more targets. Mekhi Lemon, look, I've made this case so many times. Like every time we go, he's only a slot. Like, I don't know, JSN and Amon-Ra and wait, hold on. Where do these guys play? All the Cooper Kupp's Triple Crown year came from the slot, right? Yeah. So, I'm not afraid of the slot. I'm afraid of the slot that it doesn't play. Our Jaden Reed plays, 50 to 60% of the snaps. He's very effective when he's in there. Now, if all of a sudden Jaden Reed played 92% of the snaps and was shifted outside of,
we'd like him a lot more.
Oh my God, right?
Yeah. Josh Downs, same deal with Josh Downs.
Sure. All these guys, right? Any slot only. By the way, your pod with Matt Harmon and your pod before that, unearthing why this is even a little bit more of an issue with these slot only guys is great, but we're not going to revisit that. But to the point that we have alpha slots is a totally different player. Yes. And I think if you're drafting Mekhi Lemon anywhere before pick 35, like basically late first, which I think is where he's going to go, he going to play. He's not going to be a part-time slot.
Exactly. That's the problem. My problem is more like the Antonio Williams of or whoever, Kevin Coleman or something who is like that. They're likely to be slot players. Yep. I mean, Coleman's probably a better example, likely to play slot players. Zachariah Branch might even just be more of a slot gadgety type guy. Yes. But regardless, like those are the guys that scare me.
Yes.
Mekhi Lemon. One of the craziest things that I found when I was researching him, and as I was digging into his profile for his profile in the prospect guide, I liked him more and more.
Yes.
Now, the Zap model more than likely is going to have him number 3 of the big 3. But I think that I'm from a tiering perspective, it'll be the same for me.
Yeah.
But Lemon, that he has, when you split up the yards per route run to slot and out wide, he has the highest career yards per route run out wide in this entire class.
Let's go.
The fact that people are worried about him shifting now, granted, there's not as many routes,
right?
Smaller sample. Big plays can skew that a little bit. The fact he has a 3.53 perimeter yards per route run over his career, which is by far the best in the class.
It's incredible.
So, when you factor all of that in, it scares me a lot less, the slot stuff for Lemon versus some of the other slot players that we see in this class.
You know how it's never really about where you're going, it's about who you're going with? Like, the destination could be totally average, but if the right people are there, it becomes a great memory. Toyota really gets that. Toyota designs vehicles around real life and real people, the ones who bring everyone together and somehow make the drive part of the fun. There's room for all the stuff that comes with togetherness: luggage, golf clubs, camping gear, plus comfortable seating, smart layouts, and space that lets everyone relax. And Toyota's lineup makes it easy to find your match. The RAV4 is perfect for everyday adventures. The Grand Highlander brings serious space for up to 8, with generous legroom and expansive cargo space. The Highlander also has space for up to 8. It's ready for big moments and spontaneous ones, balancing style and flexibility. And the Sienna is built for everyday life: carpools, road trips, snacks, spills. And it even has a built-in vacuum for when things get a little too messy. Because when people are the destination, your ride is important. Learn more at Toyota.com and find the vehicle that fits your people.
Hey, it's Carissa Thompson. Everything these days is fighting for your attention. Work, family, social media, and it makes it tough to figure out what should really come first. But here's something that absolutely deserves to be at the top of your list: your breast health. Breast cancer is the second most common cancer and the second leading cause of cancer death among women in the United States. And the rates are still rising. More women under 50 are being diagnosed too. But here's a stat that really hits home. 1 in 2 women who qualify for annual breast screenings aren't getting them. That's half. And yet, when breast cancer is caught early, the survival rate is over 99%, nearly 100% for stage 1 before it spreads. If you're 40 or older, you should be getting screened every year. And if you're under 40, it is never too early to understand your risk. So come on now, pay the girls some attention. Head to yourattentionplease.com to learn your breast cancer risk and what screenings you might need. Trust me, your future self will thank you. Brought to you by Novartis.
And we haven't talked about Jordan Tyson. Analytically, for me, he looks amazing. Looks really, really good.
Yes.
But there's obviously some concerns. Do you share those concerns? Is he your wide receiver 1? Where are you at with Tyson?
Mekhi Lemon's my wide receiver 1 in the class for the reasons given. Tyson, I go back and forth with. There are some things in I'm going to tell you, like, he's the one that I'm not sure. When I first started to sort of scout him from 30,000 foot view, I'm like, dude, this is the wide receiver 1 in this class. This guy's awesome. Yeah. Injuries are one thing. I'm not like a super worried about the injuries, although they factor in. They're certainly going to factor into NFL teams too, potentially. So I don't know. I mean, you don't like guys that are injured. You like guys that are healthy. So, yeah. But insofar as he's a 22-year-old rookie, that's fine. He doesn't have a ton of red flags. So, but it's hard. So I just kind of cluster these 3 together. And I think my take will be, I'm ready to be wrong. No matter who I like best, I'm okay taking the one I like the worst, in that sort of picks 2 through 5 in your rookie drafts, right? Depending on where Mendoza is and all the rest of it. Like, I think I'm just happy to get one of them. Now, obviously, there's still more data to come. Draft position, draft capital, some combine stuff that can maybe shake things a little bit. But as you point out, I think either of these 3 guys is great. And I actually have Carnell Tate third. So right now I'd go, Lemon, Tyson, Tate. And that's a loosely held take.
Yeah, I'm not going to fault anyone for putting any of those 3 guys in any order. And I like Casey Concepcion too. I've seen takes on Twitter in response to other tweets about like Harmon's really high on Concepcion, and people saying that analytical bros probably hate him because he had a low yards per route run rate and his yards per team pass attempt wasn't that electric. But the thing that folks should realize is that when you're looking at this stuff analytically, if you get the early career production that Concepcion did, it overrides a lot of those spike. If he had a spike season, then he would be ranked even higher. He would look better, of course. But the fact that he was very productive in all 3 years, right away he was productive. Draft capital looks like it's going to back him. There are some drop issues, but I don't really care that much about the drop stuff from a prospecting standpoint. I don't think he's part of the big 3, but I think he's going to form a tier of his own for me after those guys.
It's fair. I'm okay with that. I had the 106 in one of those, those stupid drafts that you do on Twitter where they tag you and all of a sudden I love them, but they're stupid, right? So I had someone was like, Scott, you're on 106. I'm like, okay. And Casey Concepcion was the player that I was drafting, and I'm like, okay, well, is there anybody else? Because here I am on the clock. Like, what are you at? OTC, baby. What are you going to do? Are you going to take Casey Concepcion? Are there any other choices? What else could you possibly do? Not taking the RB2. I think I've made that clear.
Of course.
Definitely not taking the quarterback 2. We can get to that too, but no. And I think, okay, so what are the wide receivers? I took Omar Cooper. I really like Omar Cooper.
Let's talk about Cooper then. I took Omar
Cooper because I think he's in the conversation with Casey Concepcion. I don't think he's better. I'm not like, oh no, I have him ahead. I have him with, and so therefore wanted to sort of make the statement like, hey, I think he's around here. I think there's more to uncover, but this kid's like Deebo Samuel, a real wide receiver who can shake tackles. He's got those legs, he's really well built and he shakes tackles and he runs real routes. So one other thing I'll say about, Omar Cooper is his ADOT was great too. He was running downfield routes early in his career. This past year, he came a little bit closer, got a lot more slots. I think they just wanted to feature him because they know how awesome he was. So I think he's a real downfield wide receiver that can also get the easy stuff.
Yeah, after doing his profile, I started to like him a lot more too, because it was kind of, I probably wrote it like a week and a half ago, and I feel like the steam has really started with Cooper over the last, like around that time was kind of like the start of that. And yeah, like Debo was one of his comps, Rashee Rice was one of his comps too.
Yes.
Now, to be fair, the model did not really love Rashee Rice coming out. So there's that, but I do think that the archetype of Omar Cooper being that tackle breaker and that guy who could do a lot with the ball in his hands is definitely there. You know, another guy that I saw you tweet about is Elijah Surratt. You know, played with him. How high do you think he should be ranked? Do you think that he's in that tier with those two guys too?
Yeah, the more I think about it, like the more I want those three guys as sort of a tier. And I'm willing to put Denzel Boston in there. I think we're going to talk about him. He's another one of those outside players that, by the way, late breakout. I mean, he did nothing. Zero. Denzel Boston.
Full transparency, he scares the crap out of me. Scary
player. So for
the draft
me,
capital should be there.
Yeah, for me, I'm happy to fade Boston to Surratt. Meaning, I think when the ADPs finally drop, Boston's going to be drafted ahead of Surratt in the NFL draft, and therefore it's going to be like Boston's going to be in that 108 to 110 range. My guess, and Surratt's going to be in the 203, 204 range. Yeah. I think and for those reasons, I think of Surratt more like a Jaden Higgins prospect. And, I'm not saying they play exactly the same. I'm just saying sort of, I think they're better than they're going to be given credit for a multitude of reasons. But his prospect profile is dope. I mean, if you look at the data on, and the analytics on Surratt, he's been awesome.
Cool story for Surratt too. He went to St. Francis as a 0-star recruit.
Yes.
And then he goes to James Madison, and then he follows Cignetti to Indiana, and literally every year just got better.
Yes.
For Elijah Surratt.
Like, and I think a lot of the, 0-star stuff is what is holding him down. I think there's just sort of people hanging on to their priors, but if you just look at how good he is, he's good.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I do think and like Denzel Boston is just one of those like absurd range of outcomes going from Kevin White to Cortland Sutton.
Yeah.
Like it's just this really, really wide range that if draft capital does correlate strongly to rookie draft ADP, then I'm with you that it's going to be very, very hard. Like if Denzel Boston's sometimes going ahead of Casey Concepcion or even like, I just can't. I will not be able to do that. I don't think it's going to happen, but if it does, I wouldn't be able to do that.
I think it's going to happen in leagues because I think, it's possible. Like, look, the draft, it only takes one team to sort of muck up the works and take a guy too soon or too late or whatever, But I do think Boston has a very good chance of being drafted ahead of Concepcion because of that sort of thirst for, look, it's hard to find a guy like that can play like Denzel Boston, at the NFL level. It's easy to find a slot guy like, Cooper and Concepcion. Again, I'm not saying that they're not good. I mean, even, and what I mean by that is like Wan'Dale Robinson's available. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like, again, you understand what I'm saying, right?
Yeah, no, of course. Yeah. I mean, like it's very natural for a dynasty manager to fall in love with the bigger body dudes that seem like they have this massive ceiling. Something that's interesting about Denzel Boston too, that I looked at whenever I was looking at their production profiles and their journeys and stuff, because the way I go through this is that I don't know much about college football before I do the prospect guide. I'm a very casual college football watcher. And so then I start digging in. And so I write, the higher end guys first. I'm just going profile by profile. And then sometimes I get to a guy who I'm like, oh, he played with this other player. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to reference that, whatever. One player that I wrote up was Jeremy Bernard, who played for Alabama, but he played in Washington earlier on in his career. Yeah. And he played on that team with Michael Penix, Jalen Polk, Rome Odunze, Jalen McMillan, and Denzel Boston. Incredible. And in that same offense, he far outperformed Denzel Boston that same year. And so you now have a comparison. Now they're totally different wide receivers, literally completely different wide receivers. But from a production standpoint, you have this really interesting comparison of what happened when they were both together, two guys in this class. I mean, Bernard's going to be a day two guy probably. And what happened, this is not a pro Bernard take for the record. Like I think he's fine, but he's not someone that I'm like, jumping for joy over. But the fact that you have this other player in this class who actually did get some production in an offense with legit wide receiver NFL talent is kind of interesting when you compare the two, you know, and you look at those journeys. I'm not saying it's foolproof, but it's at least an interesting narrative that you can talk about.
Yes. I think Jeremy Bernard is definitely going to be a little bit of fool's gold, you know, and I hate to do the helmet scout thing, but it was the guy that popped to mind. I was like, who's the guy that like gets a lot of like love as a good player, but then when he's in the NFL is just another guy, even though he's still just as good as he ever was. Like John Mechie, you know what I mean? Yeah, it's like, sure. You know, it's like, yeah, he went to a big school. He played good. He was a good football. Like he's good, but he's just not that type of elite, you know, wide receiver the next level. I think that's probably what we're seeing with Jeremy Bernard.
Yeah. Are there any other players who you look at and you're like, there's one for me. I mean, there's actually a lot of them for me in this year's class, but are there any guys that you look at and you're like, why is this guy getting hyped up the way that he's getting hyped up right now? Yeah,
I definitely thought about this question a little bit. There's a few, and we touched on a couple of them. There's two I'll give you. The first one I'll give you, which we haven't mentioned, is Malachi Fields.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Let's talk about Fields.
I mean, this is so bad. It doesn't even,
I don't understand it.
Like, what are we even talking about? He's a 5th year senior. So he's not even an early declared. Never mind that. He's 5th year. Yeah. He had no production before his junior year, 172 yards and a touchdown. Mm-hmm. Nothing on the profile. I just look, I'm like, there's nothing there. On top of that, he's a sort of an oversized outside X.
Yep.
Yuck. All the way around. I have no interest in Malachi Fields unless he turns into a tight end.
If you look at, since 2020, there's been 9 wide receivers drafted between picks 33 to 100. I'm looking at my prospect guide right now, who posted a best season yards per route run rate below 2.3. He was at 2.2.
Yeah.
Malachi Fields was. So he's short of that threshold by, I mean, it sounds like it's just 0.1, but that's not nothing, right? No, for a best season yards per route run. These are day 2 guys since 2020, basically. The wide receivers, Van Jefferson, Josh Palmer, Jonathan Mingo, Keon Coleman, Adonai Mitchell, Jalen Polk, Luke McCaffrey, Savion Williams, and Isaac Tesla. Like
studs.
It's scary. Yeah. His breakout score is not good. Like he's one that definitely catches my eye. The other one for me, I mentioned him, was Zachariah Branch.
That's the other one I was going to say. It's crazy.
I mean, the dude, this is the quintessential player. And this might bite me in the butt a year from now where you guys are clipping this. And
go for
just remember, this is in the late February when I'm making this take.
Let's hope it does clip you. Go for it. I'll quiet down.
Not that I'm going to change this take.
Yeah, exactly.
But this is the exact archetype of player that on day 2, NFL teams look at and they're like, oh, he's got crazy speed. He's got traits with the ball in his hands where he's going to be able to take anything to the house. But the production profile is just non-existent. It's just not there at all. Not that it's non-existent. So many of his looks, 45.5% of his career targets came behind the line of scrimmage. The players that we see with that kind of, or 35% of his career yards came on screens. Since 2020, among top 100 picks, you have 2 wide receivers with a rate of over 30%, Malachi Corley and Anthony Schwartz. That's the archetype that we're looking at with Zachariah Branch. I mean, you get guys like Corley and, Velus Jones, Kadarius Toney. I mean, it's these gadgety type players that I'm just not going to get excited for from a fantasy football perspective. It's just not going to do it for me.
I will not draft Zachariah Branch. It won't happen. I will have 0 shares, 0 cares. It's just, there's no spot in the draft where I think that that's a good pick. Like,
do you think that I haven't looked at any rookie draft ADP. You definitely have looked at it more than I have. Yeah. Is there any chance that he's going ahead of maybe like an Elijah Surratt?
I think so. Or do you think,
I mean, that's like that right there is the upside for a Surratt is just so much more immense.
So there's going to be the mock draft sort of, there's a lot of people who do them on Sleeper and all over the place. There's definitely going to be some groupthink. And I think, you have a big voice, however big my voice has not been pleasant on Zachariah Branch either. So there's some voices out there that are going to be, basically pointing this out. I think he's going to fall, but then who knows what happens again at the draft, right? Because you make a good point of Zachariah Branch is actually fairly valuable for an NFL team if, he can do some things. He's definitely an athlete. You can definitely scheme some things up, jet sweep. I mean, he creates some leverage, but he's never going to be a guy I'm putting into my fantasy lineup.
But front offices are so arrogant, right? And they look at him and cause
We'll teach him.
If you squint,
Yeah.
it's Tyreek Hill.
Yes.
Right?
Oh my God. Stop it.
Right?
Yeah.
So like an NFL team is going to, and look, this is why I look in range of outcomes, because I'm like, okay, there's a 0.5% chance that this becomes a Tyreek Hill situation. Sure. We can recognize that. That's fine. Okay. But an NFL team doesn't see it as a 0.5% chance. They see it as a 25%.
Chance. That's so funny. I find it amazing that I don't know if that's true. That's crazy. Like, I
think it's true. I think NFL front offices look at these players and they say to themselves,
maybe it's Tyreek Hill, really?
Yeah. Well, I mean, like,
I think
they believe I don't think they'll make that 1-to-1. I mean, maybe they'll sit there and be like, well, we'll look at the impact that Tyreek Hill made, right?
Oh my God, yeah, right.
I think that NFL teams are unbelievably cocky and they draft players because they think that they can develop them. And some of them are very, very good at doing that. And so I don't want to throw all of them under the bus, but a lot of teams, they get cocky with the way that they draft, especially a wide receiver. And this falls into the same idea. Like, these teams have very similar archetypes that they go after all the time. Like, I remember there was one year, the year that Xavier Worthy came out, and like there was an Adonai Mitchell a couple years ago, whenever they came out. And I remember I had written their, in the prospect guide, because this is when the draft happened. And one of Xavier Worthy's comps was Marquise Brown, right? Yeah. And then lo and behold, the Chiefs went and they drafted Xavier Worthy after going after Hollywood Brown, right? And then one of Adonai Mitchell's comps was Alec Pierce. Now, Alec Pierce ended up breaking out year 4, and the model looks at year 1 to 3. But Alec Pierce was one of Adonai Mitchell's comps. Lo and behold, the team goes out, and Chris Ballard loves himself these athletic wide receivers, and they draft Adonai Mitchell, right?
Yes.
And so these teams do, like, they repeat the same behaviors.
Kyron Williams, Blake Corum.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah. These, and sometimes it's like logical, you know, and like that's a logical enough thing to do whenever you look at what I think they were trying to do.
They do it.
Yeah. I think they were trying to do the same thing with Jarquez Hunter last year. They just wanted that same kind of archetype of player, because then they can have the interchangeability of these players without having to show their hand when certain players were on the field, which is incredibly smart. Like, the Rams are good at this, you know, but then there's some teams that just like, what are you doing? It's just and like the Chiefs getting Mecole Hardman, Zachariah Branch. I'll call it right now. The Chiefs are going to get Zachariah Branch.
Oh my God.
Like that'd be great. And he's literally his top comp in the model right now is Mecole Hardman. Yeah. Zachariah Branch. So like it's these teams think a certain way. And trust me, I don't think they're definitely going to get Zachariah Branch. I'm just giving you the example of these teams and the way they think and how they think they can develop these guys. And the biggest mistake I've learned, because I've made this mistake plenty through playing Dynasty and doing this analysis, is that when you fall into the trap that the teams fall into and thinking that team can really develop that player, that's when you get screwed. That's when you draft Mecole Hardman, 104 in a rookie draft, when the production profile is just not there at all.
Yeah. And I'll be clear about all this. I don't really know if he's good or not, like Zach Branch. I'm not like some sort of scout. I'm just telling you, based on the math, this is a bad bet at that price, and generally speaking. So, if you talk about our wide receiver model, it basically is regressive, because if Zach Branch gets drafted in the first round, I'm not giving him extra points. He's a bad pick in the first round. He's not a first round pick. So there's no bonus points for him. He's not that player. And so therefore it's a bad bet. We're not going to let a model get tricked into moving a guy like that up. And it is what it is. Like, that's just the bet he is. Now, is it possible, as you point out, that he ends up being good? Of course it's possible, man. Like, even Wan'Dale Robinson, sort of had a little bit of that type of profile, right?
But he was productive.
He was more. I know that. But I'm just saying, I sort of said a little bit, it's not, it's a better bet, but it's a similar bet at least. And like, here he goes. He's having a little bit of success. He's a free agent. He might go back in the bottle too. We don't even know.
Yeah, sure.
Like, I would bet against another progression from Wan'Dale Robinson, just so you know.
Yeah.
I mean, I think
exactly.
Based on that profile.
And the thing is too, though, like if you look at players who have the Branch profile, and again, yes, my analysis is going to be based on what we've seen historically, me trying to put my spin on where the NFL is going and where I think these players fit in. Of course, like that has to be the case, but I'm of course going to be looking at what we've seen historically And to your point, we're placing bets and we're saying, does this make sense based on what we know about what hits and what doesn't hit?
Yeah.
And yeah, that's my approach, guys. I'm very math based. I'm very analytical based, and I'm going to watch, like, as I'm writing these profiles on my other screen, I'm watching these guys play just so that I'm not just saying things just to say them, and I've watched them play. But with that being said, when you look at expected value, the only guys who have kind of a similar, high behind the line of scrimmage, high screen, slot work, whatever the case may be, as Branch that have gone day 2 over the last, 5 or 6 years, the only 2 guys that stood out that have been productive, because a lot of them have not, like Lynn Bowden, Amari Rogers,
love Lynn Bowden,
Kadarius Toney, the 2 guys who did were Wando Robinson and Luther Burden that have done some production stuff.
Yeah.
But both of those guys had way better age-adjusted production than Zachariah Branch has. And I think that's the difference here.
Yeah, I like that you brought in Luther Burden. Look, there is a possibility that Zach Branch is good. I just think that at the end of the day, his speed, the way he runs at the combine, he'll be overdrafted, and therefore he'll be pumped up. And it's just like you say, it's a low outcome bet. A lot of times too, I think you start to get into stuff like, at some point you want to switch over and draft these awful running backs, as bad as it is, Woody Marks, what were all the Kyle Monungai? I'm not saying he's bad, but he was a 4th, 5th round rookie pick.
I got Monungai in our league together.
Damn right you do.
Yeah.
Killed me. But these are that's the backs that actually that can win for you. I mean, the likelihood that Zachariah Branch is going to win for you is very low. The idea that, later on in drafts, you either want the elite wide receivers up front, and then shift to maybe another position, JJ, this year. Record number of tight ends, invited to the combine. What were your thoughts about that based on the heels of your analysis that tight ends are sort of taking over a little bit? You get a record number of tight ends invited to the combine. Pretty cool. My
thought was, this is the first year we're doing tight end profiles in the prospect guide, and we do all players who are invited to the combine. And
luck.
of course, this is the one where we get more than any other class since like 2004 or something like that.
Yeah. What I said record. I mean, I don't know. I went back 20 years. So yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I mean, like, I'm excited to see. I haven't dug into many of the tight end, like, because Brandon Gadula is going to be running point with a lot of the tight end stuff. And then I'll be working with him once I'm done with the running back and wide receiver work. But, like, last year's tight end class was elite, like incredibly good. It's going to be very hard for a class to match up to what we saw last year. Yeah. And like last year going in, it was interesting. Like, I remember looking at it and being like, wow, this is a good tight end class. But I don't think the consensus going in was necessarily like it was going to be nearly as good as it ended up being.
I gotta give my man Theo Greminger. He would say it's going to be a transformative tight end class. That's what he did.
Good for him.
Transformative. And I would always bust his, be like, oh, transform, I'd roll my eyes into, but he was right. He was right. He called it. He absolutely called it. Speaking of transformative tight end class, I got to ask you, whatever research you've done or however deep you are into the tight ends, what do you think about Kenyon Sadiq?
I honestly have not dug in enough to like, because I don't want to say anything that I would regret saying, I've been so focused on running back and wide receiver. I haven't fully gotten to tight end yet. Where are you at with them? So you can give the folks
I'll just tell you, I think when you start to uncover Kenyon Sadiq, you're going to see some troubling data points that don't make sense and that don't make him the tight end one in a rookie draft, nor a first round draft pick in the NFL draft. It's a little scary. I'm seeing a little bit more Jonnu Smith, Chiga Okonkwo than I am, Brock Bowers, Trey McBride,
Interesting. Yeah. So what I've been doing with tight end, we sent an email blast about this earlier this week, but essentially Brandon Gadula, who I hired on at the beginning of January, and I have been working on a tight end model because I wanted to kind of scrap mine. It was like, we're still using some of the stuff from it, but we needed to just kind of work with it a little bit differently. There's some really fascinating stuff that we've uncovered. Brandon did a lot of like the heavy lifting. I was kind of overseeing it all. And one of the things that's incredibly interesting in this model, and the example that we used, that I use in the guide itself, this is kind of a spoiler, but I do think, and we might actually just send a newsletter about this, but Brandon found the example of Michael Mayer versus Hunter Henry. Okay. Mm-hmm. And this will give you an idea of how draft capital is working with athleticism, is working with college production within this model. if you look at Michael Mayer versus Hunter Henry and their collegiate career and what they looked like as prospects coming in, almost identical height and weight, almost identical speed score, height adjusted speed score, almost identical yards per team. It was identical across the board, production, athleticism, and height, right? The one thing, actually, no, sorry. Athleticism was the one part that wasn't identical. Okay. So similar like size, similar draft capital, and then similar production. Okay. The one thing that wasn't was the height adjusted speed score. In almost every model that's out there, it'll say, go with the guy that has the better height adjusted speed score. Go with the Michael Mayer over Hunter Henry. Hunter Henry has a significantly higher ZAP score than Michael Mayer does in that model. And the reason for that is because the athleticism piece, while it's good for tight ends to have, when you layer on draft capital, what that's telling us is that a team liked Hunter Henry, despite not having strong athleticism, not being like an excellent athlete. And as a result of that, there are probably these things that he does from like a route running perspective or some other factor that is making him a better player overall. So the tight end model, it's not as simple as running a straight line really well at a heavy weight and be relatively productive. Jordan Reed's another one. Jordan Reed looks pretty good in the model way back in the day when he came out. People might forget, but he was an awesome fantasy asset. And when he came out, wasn't actually the most amazing athlete from a height adjusted speed score perspective, but he still had day two capital. He had good college production. And so what that capital is telling you is that there's probably something else there that makes that player, it's not foolproof, but makes that player really interesting and good. Harold Fannin would be another one from last year.
So
right?
I before the draft, I comped Harold Fannin to Jordan Reed.
There we go.
People got mad at me, and I'm like, no, this is a good comp.
Yeah.
Like, what are you talking about?
It's the lack of athleticism, but then you have the capital and the production,
and the capital
and
comes
all
from,
of that works together.
Yes.
I'm saying all this as a teaser for the guide for sure.
Yeah.
I am incredibly pumped about that tight end model because from what I've seen, because a lot of models, even the running back and wide receiver ones to a degree, are very additive, right?
Yeah, right.
And what they do is they're looking at all these different factors, they're adding them together, and they're saying this is the kind of player that we're looking at here.
Yes.
And they're not necessarily working in conjunction with each other's. I mean, like mine does to a degree, but a lot of times you're just like, oh, he's athletic. Oh, he's productive. He has good draft capital. Yeah. That's all good. Now but there's a lot of these things that work together that can discover and allow us to discover things that we might not have otherwise seen in the data that we can't see in the data because not everything's going to be captured that way.
That's right. No, that's pretty cool. I love that. That sounds great.
Yeah. I love that we just went a completely different direction off of you asking me that question. I have one more. I got to ask you, do you have any late round wide receivers that you like from this class?
Do I?
Oh, let's hear it.
Well, so I would say that there's a couple depending on how late we're going, but I think Skylar Bell.
Oh, I like Bell. Yeah.
I mean, again, when you go late, you're kind of looking for, you're just looking for something to grab onto, right? You're not saying, oh, this guy's definitely a sure thing, but I think there's some things in Skylar Bell's profile and it sounds like, actually, I forget who it was. Maybe it was Jeremiah. They had him pretty highly ranked, in the top 10 wide receivers. So I was like, wow, okay. So maybe this is already sort of cat out of the bag situation. So Skylar Bell's one. Ted Hurst is everybody's favorite right now. I think maybe it was Davis Maddock. I forgot who said it. It was like, Ted Hurst is the guy that you want to be high on so that you can impress the other people in your group chat or something like that, Yeah. That's Ted Hurst. And then of course, I'm just still pulling for Tyron Montgomery to get a chance. I thought it was a shame that he didn't get to go to the combine. I mean, he showed out at the Senior Bowl. Like what NFL, no fun league? I thought that was a joke, but not having him there is tough, but Skylar Bell is probably the realistic one. But he may not be late round, for very long.
Yeah. Skylar Bell, his top comp right now, and again, this can change based on the height weight stuff at the combine, right? But I just wanted to run based on, cause sometimes for people who don't know, you go Google and look up these guys' height and weight, and then all of a sudden, like they go to the combine and they're 3 inches shorter and 15 pounds lighter. And you're like, what the heck? Where did this come from? His top comp though is Ricky Pearsall, which I thought was pretty interesting.
There you go.
Kind of a versatile that he had, because Skylar Bell had some of that rushing production and stuff at one point in his career, but he has kind of like a versatile profile. He's a little bit older. You know,
Yes. He's a
not
late
the youngest,
bloomer. That's the problem.
Yeah,
Yep.
not the youngest
We'll see.
prospect in the world. So he's an interesting player for sure. And another fun fact, in the Zap model, there are 6 players with the last name Bell.
Oh.
3 of them are from the 2026 class.
There you go.
Yeah. Crazy, right?
Trivia. Trivia night.
That's analytics for you guys.
Hashtag analytics. That's right.
Yes. All right. Before I let you go,
Yeah.
this was great for the record. I always love chatting with you.
Yeah, so much fun.
Give me an NFL draft hot take before I let you go here.
So I didn't know how far back I went, but I'm pretty sure there's never been fewer than 4 running backs selected on day 1 and day 2 of the NFL draft. Hot take. The fewest number of day 1 and day 2 running backs ever selected in the NFL draft will be in the 2026 draft, where 3 or fewer go in day 1 or day 2.
See, first off, I like the take, but second off, you don't want that. You personally don't want that to happen because then no one will be taking that RB2 in the first round.
That's right.
Won't be able to get that
Yes, that's right. I'm betting against myself. Either way I win. Either my hot take comes true or my dynasty dreams come true.
Yes, exactly.
I love that. This is the way I make bets. I can't lose.
Yeah, I love it.
Just like
Scott,
when Drake May came out, I said, I hate this pick. And I just knew either I was going to have the right take or I was going to get the greatest quarterback of all time. Who knew? You know?
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Yeah. This was great, man. Let everyone know where they can find you, what you're working on, all that great stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Find me on Twitter or X, whatever they call it nowadays, at Dino Game Theory. OTC Fantasy coming your way soon. There'll be a website. We do have a little bit of a Twitter presence, easy for me to say. Also, most importantly, check us out on Dynasty Underground. That's my podcast and YouTube. And The Undrafted is my podcast.
Yeah, great show. You had Scott Connor on recently.
Yeah,
great. You guys are both big Dynasty Game Theory people, so it's great to hear you guys chop it up.
Yeah, that one was the Scott Connor State of Dynasty show that just came out, and every time I have Scott on, we don't talk about any players. There's no players. We don't talk about players.
That's his MO.
Yeah.
That's his MO, and he's great at it. I mean, there's no shade at all. He's awesome.
I literally toward the end of the show, I asked him. I said, "Hey, so any player you want to mention? You know, just sort of anybody you love, this position or that position?" He goes, "No."
Yeah, I love it.
All right, see you later.
That's like when we were at Radio Row and we were talking I had Tedero McMillan on the show, which was awesome. That's a crazy experience. Yeah. And we were talking to him and Kitchen asked him if he modeled his game after any wide receiver. And he just goes, no.
Right.
Just no. It's like, no. Thanks, T-Mac. Appreciate it, brother. No, I appreciate your time as always. And then as always, folks, make sure you're checking out lateround.com because the prospect guide is currently available for pre-order. It launches March 16th. I think it's March 16th, but you can check it out. Lateround.com. The price will go up from $14.99 to $19.99 after it launches. Otherwise, everyone, thanks for tuning in.
You know how it's never really about where you're going, it's about who you're going with? The right people can turn any drive into a great memory. That's something Toyota really believes. They design vehicles around real life and real people, the ones who make plans happen and bring everyone together. Inside, everything's built with passengers in mind. Comfortable seating, smart layouts, and space that actually works so everyone can relax and enjoy the ride. There's room for the people, room for the stuff, and room for the moments that happen along the way. Because when people are the destination, your ride is important. Learn more at Toyota.com and find the vehicle that fits your people.
Ever feel like your bedroom's shrinking? Don't worry, you don't have to sell your favorite things to make space. With IKEA Bedroom Storage Solutions, think dressers, wardrobes, full closet systems, even storage boxes. You can keep it all. Your vintage band tees? Safe. Those limited edition sneakers? Plenty of room. And yes, your childhood teddy bear gets a spot too. Don't sell what you love. Store it instead with IKEA Bedroom Storage Solutions. Shop now at ikea.us/bedroom storage.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.